I do want to reflect for the next few weeks on how God reigns or how he rules. And if you're like me, and like what even Jesus said, it's a mystery at times. I'm called the mysterious reign of God. And I want to reflect on how God's kingdom or rule or reign comes into the earth. And if you're like me, and you don't have to be, it's not always easy to see God at work. It's just not. You think about, man, I watch the evening news or in your own life, the evil that goes on or the despair or the addictions, the problems, the struggles, shootings in schools of innocent children. It's not always easy to see him at work. And I know that very much that we have the freedom to say no to him, which means we have the freedom to pick up guns. We have the freedom to say hateful things about people on emails or texts or in gossip. We have freedom. We have freedom to do evil things. We also have the freedom to do good things and loving things and the right thing. It's just not always easy to see him at work. That's not a new problem. It's not a new issue. It's a very old concept that in the ministry of Jesus, they struggle with that sometimes too. I love the author of Hebrews. In Hebrews 2, he says, he was put everything under his authority. Though we don't see it all under his authority, we believe it because he was resurrected from the dead. In other words, they're not dummies. They realize that everything doesn't look like God's making everyone do what they want to do. Of course not. We have the freedom to say no. But it's not always easy to see him at work. And I will reflect in the next few weeks on what it means for God to be at work. Jesus talked a lot about this topic. In fact, most scholars agree it's the number one topic of Jesus. A lot of people think Jesus was a hippie. He walked around saying peace, love, and dope, except the dope part, or maybe not on Sundays. And he don't cause war, and he's just kind of a, granola kind of guy, and the Lord is flip-flops, and that's just not Jesus in the Gospels. If you've ever read the Gospels, that's not the Jesus we get. He's one who talks over and over and over about God's rule. Now, look at this clear. God's kingdom, God's reign, God's rule, same thing. Same Greek word. So pick one, pick them, it doesn't matter. So in your New Testament translations, when it says the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, God's rule, God's reign, they mean the same thing. Does that make sense? All we're talking about is this. What does it look like for God to be your boss? That's it. What does it look like for God to be your boss? For his rule to be established, for his reign to be established, for his kingdom to be established. That's it. And so in a nutshell, the gospel, the good news is that, as I said a few weeks ago, is the declaration that God's loving, redemptive rule or kingdom or reign is being established in people's hearts and minds, Mary's heart and mine and yours, every single time we respond in faith. Respond in faith in the Gospels, the New Testament means I confess I am a sinner, I repent of that sin, and I put my faith in him alone. It does not mean I grow up in church. It doesn't mean I just serve the homeless. It doesn't mean, I like to read my Bible a lot. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means I reject my former way so that he can come in me and break that sin nature I used to have. And now that evil and sin is broken, I accept his rule. I hand it all over. Back to my analogy I use over and over. It's like if I went to the military and said, who's your commanding officer? It's Bob. I don't really do what he says, but he's a nice guy, and I respect him. I appreciate what he says. Well, then he's not your commanding officer. It's this all or nothing thing. That's how it is in Christianity. Jesus never gave us this middle gray area where you're kind of a fan from a distance. He never asked for that. It's the declaration that God's rule, his kingdom, is breaking in. But if you don't want his rule, it's not good news. And most people who don't think they're sinners, I'm not that bad. They don't want God's rule because they like their own rule. And that's the center of man these days. And atheism particularly is you're the measure of what's right and wrong. They don't want to have God's rule. So Jesus encountered the same thing in his ministry. Not everyone wanted to hear it, but those that did received his redemptive, loving kingdom and his rule. So turn to Matthew 13 if you haven't already. And just very briefly this morning, and I mean very briefly, we're going to reflect on how Jesus talked one example of how God's rule or his reign was breaking in people's lives. He tells this parable that many people know, and that's okay if you know it, that's good. Let's start in verse 3, 13 verse 3 for time. So all the crowds get together, And remember, the crowd are not disciples. These are just crowd. These are people on the outside who they're interested in Jesus. They're intrigued. He's a cool guy. They're a fan. They like him, but they're not his disciples. They've not gone all in. They're interested. They're piqued. They're piqued. I believe in God. I believe Jesus is going to heal the miracles, but they're not his disciples. They're the crowd. Disciples are the next level up, and we'll talk about them in a second. He talks to the crowd in a parable, and he says this in verse 3. Do you have it? A sower went out to sow. As he sowed, some seeds fell on the path. The birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground. It didn't have much soil. Well, it sprang up, but it didn't have depth of soil. So when the sun rose, they're scorched. They didn't have root, and they withered away. Other seed fell on the thorns, and thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on the good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, 60 and 30. You have ears to hear, let them hear. What in the world's going on there? Well, in the ancient world, this sowing happened all the time with farmers. I'll show you a picture. This is modern-day Israel. It's not doing the exact same thing, but you can find pictures. They sow. It's a little different these days, but they had to have a little pocket thing on their side. They had to walk around and tossed out seed. In different parts of this world, sometimes they would till the ground first, then do the seed. Other times they did the seed and then tilled on top of it. Just depended. But it's rocky. You see the little rocks in the picture, perhaps, there on the bottom right. It's not always easy to grow things there. But everyone knew the image in his time period. If you weren't a farmer, you knew a farmer. Your uncle was a farmer. You were that or a fisherman, basically. That's not much to do with there in Galilee, in that area. So here Jesus is using sowing as a metaphor. A sower goes out to sow is a metaphor for preaching the gospel, preaching the good news. And what's the good news? That God's kingdom or rule is coming in, breaking in people's lives. So Jesus used this. A new Israel is being planted, a new people. And he wants his disciples to sow as widely as possible. Don't be too calculated that you just get on that particular soil you'll think is going to grow. Spread that joker. Get it to everybody. You never know how much growth is going to happen, but you got to sow widely. You got to keep going. Now, the crowds don't get it. That was typical. I don't really blame them. I think if I were in the crowd, quite frankly, I'm not always, Jesus, I like your fish and your bread, man. You can make a good fish fry. But this teaching stuff, I don't always understand. So the disciples, look in verse 10. In verse 10, the disciples come together and say, why do you speak to them in parables? I'm going to come back there in just a second. So because I'm trying to demonstrate just right now, the crowds don't always understand it, nor the disciples. Okay. Each one of us, Jesus is saying, is a soil. They might say the word, we have a heart. We use the word more mind. All of us has the capacity to receive or reject God's rule. That's the soil. You, metaphorically, are a soil. I am a soil. In the parable, that's all of us. The yield, the effect, the fruit, the corn on the cob, harvest. I always think of because I've always been, I'm only one bit. Got to take me to another corn harvest. I've only been to one. That's the Congroves. So I'm always going to pick on the Congroves because that's the only cornfield I've been to here so far. The yield, Jesus is saying, is directly related to the soil. So to take away the metaphor, which it nearly is fun, the effect of God's rule on your life, Joseph, and my life, and David on your life, and my life, and on, and Mike's life, and Ron's life, depends on the degree to which your soil is ready for it, the degree to which you receive it. Not just us, of course, but people on Mass Street, Kentucky, Vermont, all around us at work, your colleagues, especially Lisa's boss, he's the worst. All around Lawrence, all around it. When you meet people in the grocery store, wherever it might be, Jesus says it's like their soil. In God's rule, that seems mysterious, grows or doesn't grow, it produces fruit or doesn't produce fruit, depending on the person's heart and condition, the degree to which they receive it. The degree to which they receive it. Well, the disciples don't really understand that. So they go on to say, what's going on there? Jesus says in verse 11 something that maybe we don't like to hear much. He says, to you it has been given to know the secrets or the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. You can say kingdom of God. But to them it has not been given. He means the crowd. Disciples are explain the meaning of the parable. The crowds don't get it. To him who will more be given, and he will have abundance. But for him who is not, even what it has will be taken away. I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Now, he goes in and quotes Isaiah. What Jesus is saying is those on the outside, they've already made up their mind that they don't want to be my disciple. And if I just said, here's the problem with y'all. He spoke y'all. He was Southern. Yes, he is. Here's the problem with y'all. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Jesus knows that they ain't going to change the condition of the heart at all. He's not going to change them. The way to change them isn't just to teach them, here's what's going on. It's to speak to them in such a way that it reveals to them God's reign. They've got to come closer. Jesus' declaration, especially in parables, was an end-time mystery now being revealed to those who follow him closely. You come a little closer. Don't be shy. Remember there was a gum. What was it? Arid Extra Dry. And what was the gum one, the gum commercial? That was the spicy gum? Don't look at me crazy. It was a very popular commercial. Arid Extra Dry was the song I was singing. Thank you for that. Those in sin couldn't see or hear, understand. Those on the outside don't get it. But if you come closer, the more you grasp it, the more you'll, want to come closer so that I will explain this to you. That's how it works with God's rule. He does not force it upon you. That's not how it works. He invites. And for those that come closer to Jesus and closer on the inside and they want to know more and want to get to know more, listen, not just know more cerebrally, but really start giving up more in their past lives and getting closer. And they go, okay, tell me more. I'm starting to get it. And that's what happens. He's saying that's what God's rule is like. When you come closer and get to know Laverne, a little more Laverne says, I'll get to reveal more of who I am to you. You stay over here just being, oh, that sounds pretty good. I saw you working on your roof. All right, see you later. You won't get to know Laverne that way. That's how it is with discipleship. It reminds me, we don't have much time to watch the video. It reminds me in C.S. Lewis. Matthew, you can turn it down if you don't mind. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis. He wrote a book called remember this book? You know this movie? The Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe. And Lucy here goes up to the wardrobe. This is actually based to some degree on a true story. C.S. Lewis used to go as a child and saw this old wardrobe at his relative's house. And she goes all the way up and sees this mysterious thing, and it reminds me of Jesus' kingdom. And that's exactly what C.S. Lewis meant as well. It's like that. You can be intrigued by it, see from a distance. And she's intrigued. She's always a little scared by it. So was C.S. Lewis. And he imagined that in real life, what happened if inside this wardrobe, as the sheet comes off, it's being revealed? What if it wasn't just a wardrobe? What if inside the wardrobe, it took you to a different realm? Now, the only way Lucy's ever going to find that kingdom, and it is called a kingdom in the book, where the lion represents Jesus Christ, of course, is you've got to keep going in. You've got to keep going. And then what happens in a second? She goes in a little farther. She realizes, oh, she's still in. She's playing hide and go seek with her siblings. She backs up. She backs up. Farther and farther in she goes. Of course, there's no normal wardrobe. She realizes there's a whole other world just on the other side of this wardrobe. She would never have reached that kingdom had she stayed at a distance and just watched it. Never, ever would need it. And that's what happens with God's rule. And she goes out and you well know there's a massive kingdom. If you go on, Jesus explains the parable. Do you see what happens later on? He explains it. Maybe not. Look in verse 18. Hear the parable to the sower. He's telling to the disciples now. I'm so glad we have this written down because he helps me see more of what he meant there. Anyone who hears the word and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what's sown in his heart. So the path that the birds took it away, he's saying a metaphor. It's a parable. Some reject God's rule all out. I don't care about the Christianity. It's all stupid. Y'all are a bunch of morons. I've heard all this online. Backwoods, you believe in anything, blind faith, dummies, whatever. Some people reject it. They might hear the gospel, but they lack that spiritual insight. And Satan says, gotcha. Satan likes that. He likes that part. They just lack the insight. And it's a way for evil to come, snatch it away. They might hear it. They hear it. Everyone in the parable, everyone hears the seed. They hear it, but they lack it. The next one, Jesus says, some sown on the rocky ground. Remember that one? It grows immediately. Look what it says in verse 20. And it receives it with what? With what? Verse 20. Joy. Woo! They're excited about Jesus. But they don't get root. They don't get root. And what happens then? Not the sun scorches it, but what metaphorically what? When your Bible, what happens? Persecution comes. So in this concept, Jesus is saying some soil is, some reject God's rule, because even though they hear the gospel and they begin their discipleship track, they abandon the faith because of persecution. And I put all these Bible verses at the bottom because I'm trying to demonstrate this was a common theme in the gospel, that people kept abandoning their faith in Jesus. The number one reason people left their faith in the first century and second century and third century was persecution. In my opinion, in my talking and reading and talking and listening to non-Christians now who left the faith, it's not persecution. The number one reason is not persecution. Is God didn't give them what they expected. They would say suffering, evil. They would say he didn't get riches, whatever it is. In other words, they didn't get what they wanted. But in the first several centuries of the church, it was persecution. Some people reject God's rule. They hear it. They seem real excited at first. They're excited until there's pushback. And in the first century, it wasn't just pushback. It could be violence. It could be losing their property. It could be killed. Jesus is going to another parable. He says, some grow and they get a little bit. But then look at verse 22, what happens? The cares of the world stunt their growth, so they don't bear fruit. Now listen, there's a different one. He didn't say they reject God's rule. They receive a little bit of God's rule. So that they just don't bear results. They don't bear fruit. Because even though they hear the gospel and they begin their discipleship, they get more devoted to possessions in the kingdom. These are people I think the Apostle Paul would call baby Christians, infant Christians. So they go in, they've given their life fully to Jesus, they fully surrendered, and then they kind of back away from that full surrender and they get real excited about all the prestige of their job, money, 401k, that kind of. So they're kind of half in. They're just kind of foot's over here, foot's in there, like they mean it, but they don't really mean it because stuff gets them. If you ever want it in your life, why you don't think the Spirit's doing more in your life, you're not seeing the fruit you like, it makes you wonder what kind of soil are you? Are you this soil? Is your heart or mind divided on the wrong thing? The last one, the fourth soil, jackpot. The last one's amazing. Some fully accept it and bear hundredfold. So not the whole crop necessarily, but this seed, some fully accept God's rule because when they hear the gospel, they are fully perceptive. It says they fully understand Jesus' ministry and his message and continue in their discipleship. Listen, these are the only ones that bear any fruit for the kingdom. The ones whose soil fully receive God's rule. To use a different word, these are the ones who fully surrendered everything. They laid everything down that was theirs. They did what Jesus says in Mark 8, and also says in Matthew's gospel, if you're going to come be my disciple, you must deny yourself or your will, yourself, and pick up your cross and follow me. That is, you don't have a will anymore. Those are disciples. If you've not done that, sister and brother, listen to me, please. Those who are still awake. If you've not done that, everyone else is just, you're still in the crowd. Jesus says there's different kind of soil, different kind of conditions of heart and mind. And if you want to know why some people, it seems, why didn't God just come in there and power force it down their throat? Because that's not how God rolls. That's not what he does. He doesn't do that. And he could go, well, here's what's wrong with everybody. I'm just repeating myself. He doesn't do that either. He speaks in such a way that if you're close along interested in him, you're going to want to know more. And he will reveal more to you. You'll keep walking through the wardrobe to find a brand new world, a brand new kingdom. Some people reject the gospel because they're so spiritually, whatever, their mind is so made up against it. They don't give a rip, and Satan loves that. Others are different. Others, it seems to get rooted a little bit, but the son persecution, boom, I'm out of here. Others grow up a little bit, but don't bear fruit because of their heart and minds divided. They love other things. Then there's a small group of people, the people who were asking the question of Jesus in the first place, who are saying, explain this to us. I'm wrapping up and I'm done. I'm going to put this together, maybe ask some questions. Is God's rule going in one ear and out the other in your own life? Someone you know? That's the first point of the parable. Satan likes that. They lack the Spirit, whatever. That's what happens. Is God's rule exciting and then you're persecuted? Or is it exciting until you're persecuted? Your discipleship won't last. I tell people who want to come to Christ, I do when I get to pray with them and lead them to Christ, I tell them as much as I can early on, I'm telling you. I told my son this over and over again. Daddy, I'm ready, I'm ready. No, you're not ready. Daddy, I'm ready. Now, I tell them about the joys of it, but I always said, understand, there is joy and there's going to be persecution. The things are not going to go well all the time for you because you are a Christian. I'm trying to prepare him so he doesn't give up on his discipleship. Is God's rule taking a shallow hold in your life since you're still focusing on the wrong stuff? So here's my question for you, sister and brother, and it's been the challenge of my heart for a long time, and certainly preparing the sermon is, of course, what kind of soil am I? I think I'm the last one, but sometimes I feel like I'm not bearing fruit. And I go, oh, well, hold on. Am I getting focused on something else? My heart and mind? Am I so worried about X, Y, Z? And maybe that's one thing going on. Some areas of my life, I feel like I've completely, perhaps, rejected his rule altogether. I go, well, daggum, I don't want that to happen. I want to go all in. Maybe it depends on the season. But in general, we can say, I think I know what soil I am. Some of you in this room right now are in the crowd, and you're way off in a distance, and you heard the teaching, and that's intriguing, you're interested, and I get it, and I believe in him and all that stuff, but you don't ever take the next step to the wardrobe. It's Jesus. Hey, Jesus, tell me more. They're the groupies. They're the ones who really want God's rule to break in. God, tell me, Jesus, tell me exactly what it means for God to rule over my heart and mind. He says, the more you care about that question, how does it have more? I'm telling you, wait till you see the fruit. Wait till you see the fruit, sister and brother.